Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and plant lover. I enjoy discussing down to earth tips and advice to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. And I also aim to bring you interesting and relevant topics to educate you all about the landscaping and horticultural industry. Welcome to the Down the Garden Path podcast. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, and thank you for listening today. I'm going to do a deeper dive in asters. I know we did a show a couple of weeks ago, which I hope you enjoyed, with mums versus asters. And as I've spent some time this weekend driving around and I went on a long car ride to a small town, Ontario, and just seeing all the flowers in nature that are so happy. Meanwhile, our gardens at home are a little bit sad because of the drought and dryness that we've been experiencing here in my area of the Greater Toronto area. Although I know it's across all of the GTA. So it just got me thinking that summer, our gardens don't end in September. That we can extend the season. And there's lots of ways to do that. And I prefer to have things in the garden at all times that are blooming. So there's something blooming all the time. And usually that was like historically, as long as someone was blooming in September, everybody was happy. But we can have things now blooming in October and November. And sometimes it's very important to have that because the pollinators still need something blooming. Think of the monarchs crossing. They're crossing late fall. A lot of other a lot of other butterflies as well need larvae plants. So I thought I would do a little deeper dive in some local asters or some asters that we can grow. Now, there are over 30 different species of asters. So, it's a huge list and a huge variety of growing conditions, which I think is great because there is an aster for whatever challenging growing condition you have. If you've got really moist soil, if you've got dry shade, there is, believe it or not, an aster. And I think that's especially exciting for dry shade because a lot of the native plants and even spring plants that grow in, or plants overall that grow in dry shade, tend to be spring bloomers. Not a lot of action kind of in the summer. So it's great to know that there's a fall option as well. So that's something to look forward to. So once you're driving around and you're seeing the different color out there in the fields, most of those are different varieties of asters. So I'm going to jump right in. And one that I know I mentioned on the show, the Mums and Aster show, as well as I think Miriam talked about it also last week when we talked about native plants. So the New England Aster, probably the showiest, and the one, probably if you're familiar with plants and I say New England Aster, that's the one you picture in your mind. So it is native to most U.S. states and provinces, and it is large and showy, very bright turquoisey blue flower with yellow center. So the one thing that will, because its color is similar to another one, which I'm going to talk about soon, but way to distinguish it is its leaves are actually hairy and it's dense. The leaves on the stem are actually really dense and densely arranged on the stem. So that's the way that you can recognize it. It does vary in color. So I think the blue is the most popular, but it can go, the New England Aster can go from lavender to blue to white. And there's a pink variety that is often grown commercially, although it wouldn't be, they call it pink because but to me, it's still a shade of purple. It's not like a light pink, like many of the other perennial flowers that we have. So those, if you're buying mums this time of year as an annual or, in pots, and they are asters, chances are it's a New England Aster and it's what they term their pink variety. So these, they do prefer soil moist, and they can grow in part shade. They can be aggressive, so that's something to keep in mind. And it is one of the larger ones, as up to 6 feet tall. So so yeah, when I say aggressive, it's going to it'll be a small area this year, and then next year the area gets bigger and bigger. So it kind of spreads by rhizomes that way. So you need to make sure you're accounting for that space. And as far as the height, it could benefit. Like, so if you don't want it to get high, because the problem with when it gets tall, depending on your location, it can get floppy. So Chelsea chop, we've talked about that before in the show, where you kind of cut a plant down June or July, and then when it'll keep growing, cut it back, kind of, I should say, not right down to the ground, but cut it back, and then it won't have the time to reach to full height before it starts blooming in the fall. So, so yeah, and it is also a host for the pearl crescent butterfly, larvae host, sorry, larval host. The pollinator asters are great for many different pollinators, and many of them are also a host for the pearl crescent butterfly. So another one, so that is the New England Aster. Another one I want to talk about today was the one I was alluding to that grows in dry shade, Whitewood Aster. It's much more of a delicate flower, so it's not super showy, like most shade plants, to be honest. They're not super, you think of columbine, mostly foliage, tiny flowers. Many of the shade plants aren't super showy. So this is just another case of that. But the fact that it grows in dry shade is a bonus. The flowers are very delicate, so it's white, but they're tiny. They're very plentiful on the stem. They're very profuse, on the stem as far as flowers, but they are tiny and very lacy-like. I did plant this in a client's garden in the spring, and she was pretty impressed how well it's looking already. So it'll be interesting to see how it does next year in under trees and in a shady area. So that is good. So you can find it in Ontario in dry deciduous forests. So that's exactly what we want in our garden. If you have maple trees, pine trees, something like that, where the soil underneath is very dry and it's very shady, then this is something worth giving a try to. It doesn't get as tall, so it only gets 2 to 3 feet tall. So that's good. So it's not something that's going to be floppy or really take over in the garden. So look for a Whitewood Aster. And again, I will reiterate this at the end of the show, but most of these can be sown in the fall. So you can sow it in your garden in just by sprinkling the seed in the fall garden, in late fall, and then the winter it's kind of like winter sowing, basically. So the cold in the winter and the moisture in the winter will help it germinate and will help it start to grow in the spring next year. If you're adventurous enough and you have enough space in your garden to do that, or it's something that you could go to a garden center now and look for, or nursery, contact a landscape professional in your area where maybe they can source it for you and actually get a 1 gallon or a 2-gallon pot that you can plant in your garden this year, and then it will come back next year. So you get to enjoy it now. My next one that I wanted to talk about is Smooth Aster. So it does kind of look, kind of looks like the New England Aster, although, hence its name, the leaves are very smooth. So remember I said before, the leaves on the New England Aster are actually pretty hairy. These ones are smooth. They're lavender and blue. Again, it's the same kind of look, the daisy type flower with yellow center and the petals with yellow centers. Blooms from August to October. Also a huge pollinator for butterflies and a larvae host for the pearl crescent butterfly. Now, this one's adapted to many soils, so that is nice. So regardless, if you've got a property that has a variety of different soils or growing conditions, then that's something you could, have a couple plants in each, or a plant in each location, depending on your property. And yes, they're also a great choice for fall sowing. They get to be 2 to 3 feet tall, sun to part shade. And this variety also can be a nice cut flower. So that's something that you could bring in. Maybe if you grow annuals like zinnias that you want to bring in, or glads that you want to bring in, or dahlias that you want to bring in this time of year, then that's nice to know that you can have a companion flower that's a nice little filler flower, bright color. I find them a happy flower, but I will say most of us growing up would have just considered them weeds. So, that's what you would see growing wild in the country. But now that we're grown up and more educated as to native plants and the benefits for the environment and the importance of planting native plants for that very reason, then we know that a weed is just the eye of the beholder, really. And asters make a great plant that you can extend the bloom and the interest and the activity in your garden late into the season. The next one I want to talk about is the heart leaf aster. So lavender to light blue. It's almost white in pictures that I've seen. It is one of the latest ones to bloom and actually goes into November. So an even better example of an excellent pollinator for butterflies and bees at late in the season. This one spreads slowly by rhizomes and it lightly self-seeds. So, what I always say, it is what it is, right? But it sounds like it would be easy to control if it's seeded where you didn't want it to go. And it is 2 to 3 feet tall, sandy to loam soil, and part shade to full shade. So often it is grown in, you'll see it out in meadows, but often it's going to be the plant that's growing on the edge of the forest. So it does get some shade and some relief from the large trees later in the day, in the hot parts of the day. And that's where its happy place is. That's where it likes to be. So if you have that in your yard, if you've got, or you've already got a mature established garden like I have, and so there's sun, but then there's shade at different times of the day, then this heart-leafed aster may be a good option for you. And lastly, the Panicled Aster. This one blooms with sprays of white flowers, open spreading form, so also known as floppy. So it does say that it's best grown with other plants to kind of support it. So if you already have a native garden, or if you're planning a native garden with other large tall plants, like I think of gray-headed coneflower, some of the goldenrods that can get quite tall, cup plant that can get quite tall, then this could be an addition if you want that look and you want them to get that tall, or else you do, like I mentioned before, the Chelsea chop in June, beginning of July, and cut it back. And so it will never in your garden reach that full height. It does prefer moist soil, but it likes full sun. So that's a tricky spot. So if you have that situation in your garden, or in your yard, then that's a cool thing to know. I know some people have the drain or have a really wet area in the swale of their backyards and trying to find plants that grow, because you can't really plant trees around that area because of the drain and because of the swale. So finding plants that grow in those conditions can be tricky. So that's good to know that this is an option, and especially for late blooming, to have something blooming in November is great. Be green up until then, it would kind of probably be more of a background plant, and then have it show in November, or up until November anyway. Let me see. And the way you can tell this variety is when it is starting to turn fall and kind of be done, the leaves actually curl. And so that's a way that you can kind of distinguish it from other varieties of asters. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps you figure out which ones would work in your space. Know that you can purchase seed. I know Miriam's company, Wildflower Farm, you can purchase seeds from her, and you can again sprinkle them or plant them in your garden this fall. You can start them by, like you normally would do if you wanted them to grow them in February, March, under lights and go through that type of thing indoors, and then put them out next year. Absolutely, you can start them by seed. But I think considering this is, September and it's still warm and lovely and our fall seems to be extending, winter sowing could really work for many people, especially if you have a large space. And I think that's always worth a try. And if it doesn't work, can always just place some out in the garden and still reserve some for inside sowing, and then you have a guarantee that you will have a plant. So think about asters. They're kind of new to me. I don't currently have any in my garden, although I'm excited about the Whitewood Aster because I do have dry shade under my Crimson King maples, and most of my plants are spring. Aside from hostas, are spring bloomers, and it's tough growing conditions. Even if I add new soil, the maples take it all, and all the plants kind of struggle along there. So I'm excited to know that I could add something new to that space. So yeah, so let me know if you've grown them, if you're interested in growing them, or you have any more questions about them. I'd love to hear from you. So give me a shout out on my website in the comments. You can reach out to me, of course, on Facebook in our Facebook group, Down the Garden Path Podcast. Happy to answer any of your questions there, and all my other social media locations for Down the Garden Path Podcast. This episode is brought to you by my other business, which is Down to Earth Landscape Design. I do landscape designs on the east part of GTA, and can do them in person, or I can do them virtually depending on your situation. And if you are up for doing some measuring, then we can work it out. But I love to help people with their gardens create low maintenance, all season gardens as much as possible. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope you go out and look for some asters to put in your garden to enjoy even longer next year.